You are at Rants Incorporated, where I rant about whatever my $10 a month plus patrons want me to rant about. You can get one of these by being one of those. This one's for Conrad's Proctologist, who says, "Hey Digi, happy Chinese New Year, 125. Wow, that's when this rant was submitted. Wishing you good fortune and good health this year. For January, could you rant about people and media companies missing the goddamn point when it comes to cyberpunk? To the point, I feel as though the aesthetic that comes to most people's minds when thinking of cyberpunk is stuck in the 1980s. This is one long-ass read, so feel free to read it through beforehand. Now, I know that cyberpunk is one of your favorite genres. It's personally my favorite genre. Thematically, in my opinion, it is the most provocative out of any genre of science fiction or fantasy, and I feel as though cyberpunk's thematic strength as a premonition for humanity's future, a commentary on humanity's relationship with technology. Cyberpunk is inherently a commentary on the human condition, and as the world has become more and more technologically advanced, it's no wonder why cyberpunk's popularity has skyrocketed in recent times. All that is just great. However, I feel as though the aesthetic zeitgeist of cyberpunk is not exactly aged all that well, as our reality has moved on into the 2010s. Specifically, the core aesthetic of cyberpunk has strong roots in 1980s Japan, a chaotic period of material excess right before the economic crash. During that time, Japan earned its reputation as a technologically advanced society through its innovation in machinery. Japan made the best cars, the best electronics, TVs, gadgets, that what have you. During this huge economic bubble, everything was dirt cheap and trash piled up on the streets with how excessive Japan's materialism became. You can see how cyberpunk's aesthetic was heavily influenced by this time period. Intricate machinery and gadgetry, neon lights, chaotic and overpopulated cities, an overall sense of depersonalization and shallowness. However, somewhere along the way, technological progress shifted away from the machinery to computer science. While the 1990s was the lost decade for Japan, it was the beginning of Silicon Valley's rise to world domination. Very quickly, computers and the internet became the new Wild West of technological advancement. That trend has continued to this day, and now technological progress focuses on the aggregation of user data, the constantly growing abstraction of our lives through algorithmic complexity, and the development and deployment of machine learning models to infiltrate our very existence like never before, e.g. deepfakes and facial/body recognition systems. Obviously, the world's completely changed since the 1980s. You would think that the discussion of cyberpunk would naturally shift from the tyranny of machinery to the tyranny of information, but it seems to me like that just hasn't happened yet. I have a few ideas as to why this is the case. First off, artificial intelligence as we see it today is a very recent and very fast-growing phenomenon, so maybe cyberpunk just hasn't caught on yet. Secondly, some of the most fundamental works of cyberpunk art were created in the 80s and 90s when cyberpunk was still a fresh commentary of its time period. Akira, Blade Runner, and the original Gitz movie come to mind. It's no question why the chaotic aesthetic of cyberpunk is defined by such works as these. However, when I look at today's cyberpunk media, it feels like the aesthetic of cyberpunk is stuck in that time and place. I mean, Altered Carbon looks beautiful, but why does it look like an upscaled version of Blade Runner? Furthermore, Cyberpunk 2077, a game I actually look forward to playing, also feels more of the same old, And when you look at the stories and thematic content of those pieces of media, it's hard for me to find this stuff relevant to the world that I currently live in. Like, if I Google cyberpunk character design, I see characters with insanely intricate and unwieldy robotic limbs or characters that are full-on android replacements. This is the idea of cyberpunk in our cultural consciousness, yet when I look at the world we live in, it's impossible for me to see this as a possibility of our future, since hardware is only becoming more and more downsized and minimalist rather than bulky and overly intricate, and the technological advancements invading our lives are much more abstract and subtle, e.g. user data collection and cloud-based infrastructure, than overt and physically literal, e.g. robotic limbs and gadgetry. My core problem is this. Somewhere along the way, cyberpunk became stuck in its ways as technology zipped right past it. Its aesthetic, while cool as fuck, is outdated with respect to the current world, and as a result, the stories that cyberpunk can tell are thematically limited in terms of how relevant they can truly be to our current reality. There's a disconnect between cyberpunk's aesthetic and its thematic purpose. I fear that cyberpunk has lost its edge when it comes to its role as commentary on the human condition. These days, it even feels like cyberpunk stories are more concerned with showcasing superficial action sequences than actually providing relevant commentary. I would be more comfortable calling today's works of cyberpunk cyberfantasy instead of true cyberpunk. The one exception I know of to this problem is Psycho-Pass. Psycho-Pass is my favorite anime series hands down, and I love its clean and sleek aesthetic combined with its implementation of a mass surveillance/social credit system, something I can very easily see happening in our future. Hell, the brain network of the Sybil system is essentially just an omnipotent neural network that's constantly being optimized with new training data. But Psychopaths is the exception that proves the rule. I simply cannot conceive of a future where overly intricate robotic limbs, dirty megacities, and unbridled lawlessness are the norm. Not springing from this reality, at least. Rather, I envision a future where every person has been completely mined for their user data, where predictive algorithms dominate every facet of life, where governments and corporations alike have total control over people through targeted media and advertising, where the populace has become so inert and distracted by convenience that they simply don't give a shit anymore. Again, Psychopaths is my favorite show for this very reason. Thoughts? Okay, here's my thoughts on that great write-up. Cyberpunk is dead. Cyberpunk is dead. Cyberpunk 2077 is going to be the gravestone. When that game comes out, Cyberpunk will no longer be relevant as an aesthetic ever again. And that is because Cyberpunk has been completely corporatized. You're talking about Google search. Google is the bad guy of the Cyberpunk story. Cyberpunk as an aesthetic has become watered down because it has become a commodity. It has become commercial product. It is the most hyped video game that's coming out. Think about that. Video games are as much a gigantic evil, money sink fucking nightmare art form as anything else. And I know a lot of people love CD Projekt Red because they're fucking, European and indie and they're not EA owned or whatever, but the fact of the matter is that this is a massive budget game with a lot of advertising dollars that are going to be poured into it. It's the opposite of Cyberpunk in terms of what it represents culturally. It is a collection of all the Cyberpunk that's been made up to that point, created into one perfect, ideal image of what those people, anybody who loves that aesthetic, has always wanted. The culmination of all of it, so it can die. CryptoPunk is the future. Everything you're describing, and all the problems, all the new shit that you see as the new Cyberpunk, those are crypto problems. Those are problems that will be solved when we encrypt ourselves. CryptoPunk is the future.